Hello, patrons. So it's spring. April's just about over. I almost said it. The weather is nice outside. It is time for our monthly Q&A. And spoiler alert, we have some questions. So actually, a couple of the questions were kind of similar. We had a question from both Paul and Esteban, who asked me about basically collections. Paul specifically asked about in print. Esteban asked about PDF copies, but it's all wrapped up in kind of the same project idea that I have, and I've touched on it a little bit in the past. So let me just reiterate kind of what my goal is in terms of collecting the Console Wars or the Starcaster Chronicles or whatever into a sort of collection. So Paul, you're correct. We like the first 5 issues of Starcaster are finished. Those are just about ready to start getting put into a book and that sort of thing. However, my ultimate goal here is to actually produce 3 different hard copy books. So one of which would be the Starcaster Chronicles. That'll be issues 1 to 5 with a bunch of extra content. The second would be Analog and D-Pad, also issue 1 to 5 with a bunch of extra content. You may notice that the missing element there is Analog and D-Pad issue 5, which I am furiously working on right now, trying to get that finished so that is all that stuff is ready to get started in book form. And then finally, the last book would be basically everything else, everything since 2012 to present. So like all of the gaming one-shots, all of the even all the Patron stuff I've done, the Console Wars, the campaign, any of the sillies that I've done, all of that stuff would then be in its own volume. And so to answer Esteban specifically, I'm not going to be putting together a PDF of just the Console Wars. The Console Wars will have its own section within that greater collection of work. And to answer your question, Paul, while I do obviously have Starcaster, those first 5 issues finished, and I could be working on a book, my goal is to kind of like work on those all at once, because I would like to have a Kickstarter that encompasses all 3 of those books. Rather than doing 3 separate Kickstarters, 1 for each book, I would like to try and do 1 giant Kickstarter for all 3, because if a reader wants to buy 2 or 3 of the different volumes, if they're all part of the same project and they're all shipping together, then that reader is going to save on shipping if I can put those books into the same box. So that's kind of I'm really just trying to get my next step is once Analog and D-Pad number 5 is done, then I can sit down and start sorting out these 3 different books that I'm going to do, and and then we'll talk about PDF versions and the printed collection and that sort of thing. So next up, the Mongoose asks, what are your thoughts on how DC is separating their TV and movie universes and the new potentially connected to movies Krypton TV series? Well, I think I've touched on this in the past, but in general, I don't love that they have these 2 separate universes. It feels weird to me. Like, it feels after Marvel took this step to to connect everything, and I have a fair number of criticisms from Marvel in that regard too, in just terms of like that connection really only goes one way, in terms of like the events of their TV series mentioning and involving stuff from the movies, but it doesn't really go the other way. I understand the reason for it. There are actor schedules and planning and all sorts of really complicated issues involved. But even with that said, I love the idea that when I'm watching Daredevil, I know that I'm watching the same New York City that the Avengers live in, and that sort of stuff. It's cool to me. I like that idea that everything is connected, and I get giddy when they mention things from the movies and that sort of thing. I can see the appeal for a showrunner not to be connected to any sort of greater universe, to be able to just sort of focus on the television show that you're trying to run. But for the same reason, I hate in comic books when they have like 2, 3, 4 different continuities going at once, alternate universes and like multiple versions of the same character. That drives me crazy. That's what it feels like kind of for DC. Like, you have this one whole world and this other whole universe, and like there's no meshing between them. And so while I have no doubt some of those shows are fairly decent, like I don't feel as like I'm going to get as invested in that whole world as a result of everything being disconnected. And I think that then throwing a TV series in there that is connected, that just for me, confuses things even further, because then you're saying, you know, I mean, it's kind of like if you have this clear dividing line where it's like TV here, movies here, never the twain shall meet. That's fine. At least that's a very clear-cut thing. But now they're saying, like, okay, this TV here is its own thing, but then there's this other TV show that is connected to this, and like they're buddy-buddy, but not these ones. And I don't know. It just it's a little weird to me, and I might be, you know, cards on the table, I might be more forgiving or lenient about it if I actually liked DC more than I do, which is, you know, not to say that I dislike DC. I just I'm not in love with DC the same way I'm in love with Marvel. And again, you know, full disclosure, I am not currently in love with what Marvel's doing in a lot of their comic books right now. I think that they're in a, like, I think they're doing some really weird, fucked up shit, especially with Captain America. But thankfully, as far as I'm concerned, the MCU and all of that stuff, that's all golden. I love what they're doing with that stuff. That's just a ton of fun. We've got a great year with, you know, Guardians and Homecoming and Ragnarok. So even though the comic, you know, the comics right now are getting all kind of weird and shitty, at least, like, you know, the MCU is still this fun, entertaining place to sort of be involved in. And finally for today, Edward wants to know, for the campaign series, you know, when I tell these stories, are these games that you have actually played out with others, or is this your own storytelling? 100% it's my own storytelling. It is, I do not actually currently play in any RPG group or anything of that nature. That's not something I have time for right now. So that's one reason. The second reason is basically because for something like that, like, I mean, it's one thing to take inspiration and take like little pieces, you know, from personal experience, but for that kind of thing that I'm doing, I really need the freedom to kind of, you know, tell a story from scratch and not really be bound by what an actual player did or did not do, or that sort of thing. And also, you know, I kind of, you know, under the veil of saying like they're playing a customized, you know, campaign, like based on some modified Pathfinder rules, that gives me a lot more freedom in terms of like, you know, when I mesh what's happening on the tabletop versus what we're seeing in this like imagined fantasy world that they're in. It gives me a lot of leeway to kind of like bend rules and play with things and kind of tell a story that I think is, you know, it is fun from a like a fantasy story aspect, but also from a you know, a tabletop gaming aspect as well. And that is it for this month. That is all of the questions I received. You know, we'll do it again next month. So if you think of a question or a follow-up or you know, really anything you want to know, worst case scenario, I just don't answer it if it's like a really weird question or too personal. But otherwise, you know, if there's something you're curious about, it can be about the comic. It doesn't have to be about the comic. When I put up the thread, you know, go ahead and ask. And we'll see you next month.